You're watching The World from Below, and we're talking with our guest for the program, Professor Peter Doherty, about what birds can tell us about human impacts on the environment. Professor Doherty's 2012 book, Sentinel Chickens, looks at a range of species of birds, mapping how they fit into the ecosystem and how they've contributed to advances in medical research. Professor, what is a sentinel chicken and what made you decide to write about them?
Well, sentinel chickens come from my world of infection and immunity. They're basically chicken flocks, little chicken flocks that we put out in the environment to be bitten by mosquitoes. And then they register in their antibody response if they're infected with a virus, and people go and bleed them, and they can tell how these mosquito-borne viruses are, say, moving north-south in Australia. Mm-hmm. Classically, Murray Valley encephalitis virus, which has that type of movement.
So almost like a canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, they're canary in the coal mine, basically.
And so how do you think they're significant in terms of...
Well, in medical research, birds have been involved in all sorts of, or diseases of birds have been studied in many contexts, including cancer and so forth, and they've been one of the first actual vaccine after Jenner's smallpox, cowpox vaccine, mm-hmm. was basically a vaccine to do with the disease of birds. So birds have been involved in a lot of medical research studies over the years, and of course they are the carriers of the influenza A viruses, which are the ones that occasionally jump across and contained in nature in water birds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the interesting things about reading the books and the stories that you tell about birds is that often when we make changes to the environment or our ecosystem, the birds can be a symbol of sorts or be an actual reality in terms of what that change looks like. I'm particularly thinking of the story about vultures in India and the influx of rabies.
This story, and it's a classical example of the law of unintended consequences. The vulture populations in India have crashed by about 95%. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And basically, after a lot of investigation, it was found that the reason for this is they were feeding a which is used in us called diclofenac or Voltaren, mm-hmm. To cattle. And it turns out that when the cattle die, it's the vultures in India that pick the bones and clean up the environment. And if there's even the slightest trace of diclofenac in the carcass of the cow or whatever it is that dies, then it kills the vulture kidneys and the vultures die. And
the Voltaren for cows really was what to keep the cows alive for longer.
Yes, it was, even though India has I think it's the Hindus, isn't it, the sacred cows, they still use them for traction and for milking. And so if your cow, your animal you're using for traction to pull a plough or something, has sore joints, then you give them an anti-inflammatory and then they feel a lot better, just as we do. But if they die because it's just a symptomatic treatment and they may be sick from some other completely different reason, then it's the vultures who would normally clean them up. The problem is when there are no vultures, then it's the dogs. And you get big flocks of dogs, and if you've got big flocks of dogs in India, you vastly increase the risk of rabies. Mm-hmm. And so when all these vultures died, what happened is that the incidence of human rabies in India went up very dramatically.
So to address the impacts of humans in sentinel chickens, of Australia's response in a global context, we talk about that a bit before, the uncertainty tax and its repeal. What do you think we should be doing now to manage the problems that we're seeing in the environment, of which birds are giving us an indication of?
Well, birds monitor the environment and they are watched. There are bird watching organisations, and if you're looking for something to do with your spare time, of course, one of the great things is to become a citizen scientist and become a bird watcher, because a lot of the observations that are made are fed back into real science.
Yeah, right.
And that's there's not much money around. So it's really quite important. But it's the species we see in the wild all the time, and so they're easily observed. But with respect to what we should be doing concerning the environment, there are so many challenges, really. But we need to be thinking in those terms, and if we deny the reality of what's happening, then we don't take the necessary steps to do the right thing. There are many, many challenges. I mean, plastic, and they find nests full of baby seabirds where the birds are all dead and their stomachs are all filled with rolled up plastic because the parent bird mistakes it for food. And so there's all sorts of things happening.
Looking, sorry, I should say as well, I was interested to read that you think that part of being a scientist is thinking unconventionally and thinking outside of the box as an outsider, and that when you won your Nobel Prize, you partly attributed an unconventional upbringing to that ability to think outside the box. What do you think are the requirements of a good scientist that we need in this country to be able to advance some of the things we've discussed?
Scientists are pretty diverse, and you get all sorts of scientists who are strong in different ways. Some of them are very, very good at doing experiments and thinking in a very reductionist sort of way. Some people will think a bit less conventionally. My upbringing in science was pretty unconventional. I'm the first person with a veterinary training to win a Nobel Prize, for instance. And so that actually gave me an interest in much broader issues to do with ecology and the environment, because the veterinary training I received was all to do with the large animal industries in Queensland at the time when I was growing up. It wasn't to do with dogs and cats and so forth. It really was to do with animal production and toxic plants and agriculture and designing piggeries and so forth. So it's a pretty odd background for a medical scientist.
And do you think that's helped you develop new perspectives and be accustomed to perhaps getting results that you didn't expect as a researcher?
Yeah, I think it's the unexpected result that's always interesting, but it has to be a substantial result. I mean, people need good instincts. There are various things in science. People tend to think of scientists as being very cold-blooded and reductionist in their thinking, but actually there's an imaginative step. And the actual collection of data and so forth is very systematic and ordered, but it's really what you do with that data inside your head. And it's there that the real creativity and imagination comes to the fore. And it's often when you're actually looking at results and something occurs that doesn't occur to somebody else. And that's where highly successful scientists at times emerge.
So tell us, I think our audience would be keen to hear, what is it like to win a Nobel Prize and how easy is it? Because you're famous for writing about how as a beginner it is easy to win a Nobel Prize.
Well, the Nobel Prizes have been around for 113 years now.
Some quick maths in your head.
Less than 900 people have won Nobel Prizes. So it's pretty hard to win a Nobel Prize. That's all categories of Nobel Prizes, even including economics, which isn't really a Nobel Prize. It's the Swedish Bank's Prize for Economic Sciences. The banks bought their way into the Nobel Prize. But so there are relatively few people who won a Nobel Prize. Sometimes big organisations get awarded a Nobel Prize, like the Red Cross, or the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was awarded a Peace Prize. And so a lot of people may say, well, I'm a Nobel Prize winner because I was part of the IPCC, but it's not quite the same thing. Yeah. So it's not something you can expect to do. And any people who set out to win a Nobel Prize usually go completely bonkers, or they're mad to start. There are a few areas where you can actually set out to solve a problem that's out there. And if you can solve it, you'll probably win a Nobel Prize. And a classic example is the structure of the ribosome in the cell, where a number of people went after that problem. And then solving it, several of them got the Nobel Prize.
So you do need to be an unconventional thinker, but not too unconventional.
Some people are highly more much more conventional. On the whole, though, I think Nobel Prizes do have a bit of quirkiness to them. It's not a lifetime achievement award. A lot of people who do very well in science become members of national academies of science and so forth. And they do very substantial science. They're very well known. They do great things. But Nobel Prizes are awarded for breakthrough. And so sometimes the person who makes a breakthrough is rather a quirky type. And they may never do anything else of great substance, but they may make that just one big contribution.